Welcome to the Old Man of the Three Things with JJ Redick and Tim Legler. Legs, always good to see you on a Monday. I want to start today's episode. I want to dive right into it because Boston, Denver on Friday night, to me, there's been some great games. That was the most playoff-like game that I've watched this season. The adjustments within the game, the game plan from both teams in terms of matchups, what we're willing to live with in terms of what we're giving up defensively. Gordon playing the backup five, which we saw all last year during the playoffs. They didn't do it last regular season. They haven't done this regular season. That was a playoff game on Friday night in what could be a potential finals matchup. Your takeaways from Friday night, that Boston-Denver game. I know you just told me you've watched the game twice already.
Yeah, I watched the game twice, start to finish. And there's not many games in the regular season I'm going to say that about, because if it's a big one going into it, JJ, I usually, I'll take my share of notes. So I'm pretty much good to go with that game. I needed to see this one twice. That's how much I enjoyed it. And I think I'm going to start with this. You mentioned how it had a playoff feel to it. One of the reasons I think it did was because that, to me, is the way most games that I watch, I want to see officiated. There was a lot of contact allowed in the post. There was guys getting a little bit more handsy on the perimeter. It felt like, because both teams are at full strength, by the way, too, which was nice to see a marquee matchup and everybody's there. Everybody's healthy. Nobody's getting a load management night. Like, everybody was there clearly from the very beginning of the game. Both teams were showing you that this meant a little bit more. This was not a typical regular season game. You could tell by the energy in the building, too, and the start that Porzingis had and what that did to that home crowd. But the amount of contact that was allowed and letting guys play through it, I thought was tremendous. I mean, they combined, I believe both teams combined for 27 free throws in the game, total, 13 and 14. And they were letting these guys sort of decide it. And what you saw were some absolutely incredible offensive individual performances. And if Jamal Murray plays like that, with like that sort of mindset, when he's that aggressive, and he understood that he needed to be because of the physicality of the defense in the game, I mean, those are the two guys, he and Jokic, they're going to play through that and still be able to do their thing. He had a different gear to him and a different look in his eyes. I mean, that was, we call him Bubble Murray all the time. And I don't know if he likes that necessarily, but it kind of did remind me of that in terms of how hungry he was as a scorer, and just both teams trading haymakers and then letting it be decided in the last few minutes of the game. It was as entertaining as you can get in the regular season for an NBA game.
It's a good point on the officiating. And even, I want to get into this in a second, the last two play calls for the Boston Celtics. But even on the first play call, where they ran a little baseline screen to get Jaylen Brown ISO'd on the left wing for a quick two. When he ripped through, I thought Gordon fouled him. Like, he definitely impeded his progress, and they let it go. I want to get to that in a second. You brought up Jamal Murray, and I think Bubble Murray's fine, but let's also say playoff Murray, because I think this was the version of Jamal Murray that we saw throughout last year's playoff run, where this two-man game, it looks unstoppable at times. And Jamal Murray in particular, that was a shot-making clinic. He was 11 of 16 off the dribble. And these weren't like easy shots. I mean, he hit some tough contested shots over Peyton Pritchard, but he also he's getting guarded by Derek White, Drew Holiday at times, Tatum, Brown. Like, these are great individual defenders, and he just put on a shot-making clinic. He had 35. Jokic had 34. They scored or assisted on 89 of the 102 points for the Denver Nuggets. Jokic, 8 of 13 versus Porzingis as the primary defender, 5 of 7 versus Horford. And this was the most post-ups in a game by any player this season. What I want to talk about a little bit is this idea around, let's let Jokic be a scorer, and we're willing to live with that. And the Lakers last year had some success in that series. They also lost that series 4-0. So maybe it wasn't Maybe that whole, like, let's let Jokic be a scorer. Now, we saw it the other night in Philly where they started Tobias Harris on Jokic and let Embiid be a roamer off of Aaron Gordon. So this is clearly a strategy now with really good teams. This is how we're going to play Jokic. We're going to let him score. My only issue with this, we're coming out of the timeout to start the fourth quarter, and Katie George is interviewing Joe Mazzulla, and she asks him a question about this. And he's like, yeah, this is what we're willing to live with. You saw him in the huddle and sounds of the game. This is what we're okay. That's fine, but he's got 30 going into the fourth, and it's a 1-point game. He's got 30 going into the fourth. He's shooting 75% from the field over his last 11. No player has done that since Wilt Chamberlain in 1967. Maybe this is not the right strategy. Maybe it's not. I think you have to mix it up. And to me, the Boston Celtics never mixed it up. When he's that efficient and it's a clear mismatch, like he was having his way with Porzingis. And Al Horford, who's had some success in the playoffs, obviously against Giannis and Embiid, he had his way with Al Horford. I don't know that this is like the right strategy to beat the Denver Nuggets, and I want to get your take on it.
Completely agree. And here is why. Jokic is the one guy that if you decide to play single coverage on, okay, in the post, he's the one guy in the league, and I mean, I'm even including Joel Embiid in this, that is going to get the shot that he wants every single time. You aren't gonna speed him up. He's not going to take anything off balance. He's going to take the exact number of dribbles that he needs. He's going to spin to the proper shoulder. He is going to get the ball up there. I think he shoots the softest ball in the league, by the way. I've come to this conclusion, and we've got a lot of great shooters in this league, more than we've ever had. Nobody shoots a softer ball than Nikola Jokic. And so he gets it up there softly, even when he is getting, some physical play into his back as he's starting to spin. And a lot of guys would lose their balance a little bit and get something up there that's not soft. Everything he shoots is soft. So it's not like at any point he's going to get tired of shooting high percentage shots and just be like, you know what? I feel kind of self-conscious. I'm shooting too much. Nope. He's just going to continue to ABC you to death and get exactly what he wants every single time. Now, I get what the thinking is. Well, he's such a great passer. He's going to elevate everybody around you. But I think, JJ, certain nights, you've got to look at what everybody else is doing. Okay, this was basically two guys beating you. You take a look at the shooting night that Aaron Gordon had. It was 0 for 6 from the field. He didn't really get into any sort of rhythm in this game at all. KCP, 2 for 6. So not high volume shots and really never found a rhythm. Peyton Watson's getting a lot of minutes off the bench right now. He goes 4 for 11. So certain nights, I get starting that way. If that's how you want to try to feel the game and see what Jokic is doing that particular night, at some point, even with his passing ability, you are going to have to send somebody, even if you've got Porzingis on him, if you've got Al Horford on him, it doesn't matter. They weren't able to do anything to really affect him. And now let's see if some of the guys that haven't taken a lot of shots or in rhythm in the game are going to step in and make shots when they matter most. So I don't mind doing it for some parts of the game, but to your point, you have to mix it up on him. You have to. And particularly on a night when there's not a lot of volume in terms of shots amongst the supporting cast. See what they are willing to do. Can they step up and hit one when they haven't really had a lot of touches? I don't think that Boston really ever got into that mindset, and Jokic just continued to operate very comfortably with as many dribbles as he wanted, getting to the spots that he wanted to on the floor.
The three highest volume post-up teams in the league, which relative to past NBA standards, this is not high volume. You typically would have multiple teams that would post up more than 10% of the time in their half-court plays. Denver's number one at 8.1%. Boston posts up the second most at 7.1%, and then Philly at 6.8%. All three of those teams do it very efficiently. And you think about why. Well, Denver has Jokic. Philly has Embiid. Boston typically posts mismatches because they have Jaylen Brown, Porzingis, and Jayson Tatum. And all three of these teams are over 1.1 points per possession on post-ups. Now, why is that important? The number one half-court offense in the league this year is at 1.08 points per possession. This is what, to me, makes all three of these teams so dangerous in the playoffs. We can post Jokic. We can post Embiid. We can post a mismatch if we're the Boston Celtics. Porzingis has been fucking awesome every time he gets a smaller defender on him. He just is mashing or getting to the free throw line. That, to me, is such a good indicator of why these teams are real title threats, because they can score in the half court with their best players. Now, as it relates to Boston, I thought there could have been more of that at times in the fourth quarter. Matchup-wise, Aaron Gordon, I think when he was the primary defender on Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum, they were 1 for 9. The two of them were 1 for 9. That to me is a tough matchup, right? So if you're gonna try to go at Aaron Gordon, that's not a great matchup. But if you can get a Jamal Murray switched on to you, right? If you can get Michael Porter Jr. switched on to you in post, and they had some success in the first half doing that, I like that for the Boston Celtics. The other thing I wanted to bring up as it relates to that sort of last second play, Jaylen Brown on that first play where they didn't get a shot off. I mentioned I thought there was some contact there. You liked that there wasn't a foul. I'm fine with it, whatever. And there was a lot of noise and discourse around that play call in particular. I go back. I called the game last March against the New York Knicks. Manuel Quickley game. He was phenomenal. It was a double OT game. And Boston was down 3. Needed they had I think 14 seconds or 11 seconds, something like that. Mazzulla opted. He had the timeout. He had he keeps his timeouts. He always wants 2 when there's under 30 seconds, similar to Friday night. And he ran that play for Jaylen Brown, and he got a score and a bucket and a foul, tied the game with the free throw. We go into overtime. That's a play they've had success with. I have no issue with that. Again, the issue is in that scenario, it was, I believe, Emmanuel Quickley or Quentin Grimes that was on him, and this was Aaron Gordon. So they didn't force the switch, and it's just a tough matchup. Aaron Gordon is a big, strong, agile defender. It's a tough matchup. I don't hate the play call, though.
No, not at all. I think and you're right. Look, when I was talking about in general the way that the game was played and the amount of physicality defensively, I really liked it. You're right. There could have been a foul called on the swing through. There's no doubt about it. I think I like that particular play call better if you're able to force the switch first. It's just more advantageous. You're talking about now going up a guy that's basically the same size and he's stronger. And he's very good laterally, the way that he can slide. That's a little bit of a tougher go-to, but they've had success with it in the past. Now, the last play, when they go to Tatum for the direct out of bounds, go directly to him, he's got an advantageous matchup there. If you look at that, Jayson Tatum, I'm sure, has seen, when he watched the film, and he probably watched it sitting at his locker right after the game. He was not patient enough on that, right? He has the matchup he wants. He's got a size advantage. When he starts to go into his shooting motion, there's still 3 seconds left on the clock, right? So he did not. I think he should have spun more.
Quick spin,
an extra power dribble, gone toward the baseline, and he could have gone to a step back on balance on the baseline side with still probably more than a second left when he released the ball. Instead, he starts to spin. He feels some contact. Now, I don't know if he thought there was some contact as he started to spin and back down and he was going to get that call, but he immediately goes into a fadeaway off 1 foot from 18 feet with 3 seconds left in the game against the smaller defender. He'd like to have that one back. There's no question in my mind. I don't have a problem either with the direct entry with a smaller guy on him right there. That's your best player. That's an all-league player. That's an MVP caliber player with a good matchup. Get the ball directly to him with plenty of time, by the way. He's got time to work him, at least 2 more dribbles, and he just didn't do it. He got impatient, and he wanted to go quickly to to sort of end it, go to that home run shot immediately rather than maybe take his time a little bit more and try to get something on balance with another dribble or 2. So that's what I think the only mistake they made in the last possession. I like the matchup. I just don't like the execution by Tatum.
Yeah, and again, Mazzulla takes a lot of heat for this. The late game stuff, it feels real. It feels real that the last 3-4 minutes of the game, things slow down.
Yeah.
They don't generate as good a looks as they're getting throughout the game. I was thinking about, there were multiple possessions in that first half, a little bit in that third quarter as well, where it felt very Spurs-esque in terms of the ball movement, hitting cutters, the quick swing out, the swing, wide open three. Some of those possessions, they didn't make them. They were 14 for 44 from three, and they left a number of great looks on the table. But the last 4 minutes and 50 seconds, the Celtics scored 2 points. They shot 1 for 9. You look over the course of the season when they're in clutch games, they're 13-8. I mean, I had to look this up twice because I was like, Jesus, 13-8. And they've got a plus 19 net rating in clutch games, 124 offensive rating in the clutch, and a 105 defensive rating. So the metrics say it's there, but it always feels like the last few minutes of the game for the Boston Celtics in close games, it just doesn't feel like them. What are you observing? What did you observe the other night? Not even just the last play, but just the last few minutes of games for them. Where do you think they can be better?
I completely agree. And look, I think it's still the one big test for Missoula, right? I think there was, it's undeniable there were issues a year ago with some of their late game management, right? And just some of what they went to. And there was an uneasiness that you had watching them late and figuring out how they were going to try to close it. And some of that is still there, even though this is the deepest team at the top of the roster of any team in the league. They've got more options and places that they can go. Problem is, I think they do not force you to play defensively on those possessions, right, to their advantage. Because they have so many different guys that can hurt you, they become a little bit isocentric. They eat up too much of the clock early in possessions, thinking that they're going to end it with one of their two guys, being great in that moment. And it doesn't really force defenses to have to play them on multiple actions. And that's when they're basically unstoppable, because they have 4 different guys, really, and you count Derek White 5, that they can initiate their offense on any set.
We're going to count Derek White.
Yeah.
We're going to count
and on any set, they've got 5 different players that they can initiate their offense through in any given moment to draw multiples. And then you get now teams chasing the ball and the way that they can move it, the way that they can dribble, drive, kick, the way that they reverse it, they'll go dribble handoff, and it end up with an advantageous matchup. At some point, they don't really do that in those moments. They sort of eat up half the clock, and then they pick a side of the floor, JJ, and then it goes there and it stays there. And now they're going to try to figure out a way for that guy to go make a great shot. That's a very tough way. And I understand why it happens. The game does slow down. Coaches trust fewer guys in those moments. The more that the ball changes hands, the more likely there's a turnover or you don't even get off a quality shot. And I understand that, but I think there needs to be more trust with what you have. Like that wealth of offensive talent needs to be taken advantage of, even in those moments when the game has slowed down, because that's what makes you special. That's what makes you different. The number of guys that you have at your disposal to do that. Don't fall into the trap that most teams really have to, because they've only got 1 or 2 guys that you really trust in those situations. They have more than that. And I don't think that they force teams to guard all of that in the bigger moments. And I think you saw it again in that game.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And it's certainly it certainly is what it feels like to me. I think if you have the optionality that the Boston Celtics have, continuous ball movement, player movement, you're eventually going to end up with a matchup you want,
sure,
in an advantageous spot. But the part about initiating offense is interesting, because I think a lot of teams do that. And I brought this up on the pod already, but I just remember when we were interviewing Missoula at the beginning of the season, he had his jiu-jitsu coach in there, and they were talking about this concept of, working your way up from the ankles as a strategy to win, to beat your opponent, right? And the closer you get to the neck and head, the closer you are to victory. But that's also, you get closer to defeat. Yeah. It's just the way that form of combat works. And so the tendency is, as you get closer to the neck and head, you get tight. You start hanging on. Yeah, I want to win. I want to win. And I think that is such a good analogy for the fourth quarter of NBA games. Actually, all basketball. The game, why does the game slow down so much? You were playing one way for 45 minutes and it worked, and you've got a 7-point lead. Like, why? I get the clock. There is an element, of course, of clock management and all that, but it is interesting to me how a team can play a certain way, and then we get to the end and we're like, we're going to scrap it and we're going to slow it down.
Well, I think I have the answer. I think I have the answer to that. I really do. I think it's the mentality of, number one, there's this expectations, right, that star players put on themselves, and then I think everybody sort of puts on them externally. They've got to decide matters. The shot has to be taken by those guys, because if it's not and you lose the game, that's the first question that's coming up. Well, how does he not touch the ball in that situation, right? And so the players know that they're going to get hit with that. The coaches are going to get hit with that. So what happens is you tend to fall into this mentality of, well, I can't risk that player not getting the ball because they're overplayed and they're denied, like whatever it may be, and the ball ends up going a different direction, and maybe, your third best player, fourth best player ends up having to take the shot. And in most cases around the league, that's problematic if that's what you're having to answer after the game. That's not necessarily the case as much with Boston. And I don't have to be standing there in Joe Mazzulla's shoes. So we always make this, seem simple, right? We make it sound so simple when we're not the ones that have to do it. And that's part of the beauty of our job, right? I'm going to make something very complicated, very simplistic. But if I had that wealth of talent offensively, and also, by the way, these guys are highly cerebral. They make great decisions across the board. All of the guys we're talking about, I would hope that I would trust my creativity and understanding what I have at my disposal that nobody else really has, and not worrying as much about that. But I think that's what happens. They want to make sure that that player, whoever it may be, is not denied the basketball somehow if they give it up or they don't get it initially. So now, okay, good. We got the ball in their hands. Good. Okay, now at least that guy's going to shoot it, whether it's a quality shot or not. We're going to live with that. And I think a lot of teams are forced to, because they don't have that many options on that level at the top of the roster. But Boston does. And I don't know if they're ever going to get more comfortable with that. We'll see. But I don't necessarily love what they get typically late. And it's something that we're going to continue, I think, to bring up as they get in more and more close games as we get closer to the playoffs and throughout the postseason.
I don't care how much talent that a team has. A coach has to be good for that team to get to the conference finals, to get to the finals, whatever. Like, in some ways, Mazzulla this year, because they've got this talented team, like they're the number 2 defense, number 3 offense, best net rating in the league, and best record in the league. Like, he's doing a very good job. Like, there's Absolutely. No question. But I feel like in some ways, like Spoelstra probably doesn't get enough credit, right? Spoelstra doesn't get enough credit for the Heat winning 2 championships. Like, Spoelstra had to figure some stuff out. He had to make some in-game adjustments. He had to do things. Steve Kerr had to do the same thing. It's so, Tim, you know this. It is so hard to win in the NBA period, and it's so hard to win at the highest level in the NBA. Talent is not like, you need it for sure, but you need all this other stuff too. And it's not just on the coaching. You talk about the decision-making. Okay, Tatum, decision-making, last play of the game, probably could have got a better shot, right? Mazzulla put him in a good spot. There's just so much that has to happen for it to work out and get a win, especially when you're playing a team at the level of the Denver Nuggets. I know we spent a ton of time on this game. I do want to talk about one last thing, and this is just like an observation from the Philly-Denver game and the Boston-Denver game, and that is like just the cross matches and like the intentional cross matches. We saw it earlier in the season. Joe Mazzulla put Drew Holiday on Embiid for like 20-some half-court possessions. Tobias Harris started the game on Jokic the other night. Jokic didn't guard Embiid a lot in that game. They were cross-matched. They had Aaron Gordon on him. Jokic actually was guarding Drew Holiday a bunch, especially after that Porzingis start where he was just picking and popping. There was some miscommunication on a veer back on one play where Jokic is literally pointing like veer back to Porzingis, veer back, and the guard kept coming to the free throw line, never veered back. Porzingis gets an open three. They just said, fuck it, we're going to put Jokic on Drew Holiday. And I was texting with some people, and I'm like, Drew, you brought up the 4 or 5 guys on the Boston Celtics that can initiate and do something. Drew, in some ways, doesn't look like the best version of himself right now. I think it's natural when you have the talent. He's coming off an all-star season. You're going to a team with 6 starters, 5 guys really that initiate offense, with Derek White being the other one. Porzingis, of course, another high usage guy. So someone inevitably had to sacrifice. But in terms of the playoff-like cross matches, I'm just curious if, like, in the second rewatch, you saw anything there where Boston could have taken advantage of that matchup where Jokic is off the ball on Drew Holiday.
Yeah, I think I did, and I think I was noticing it as I was watching it, and I think what it comes down to is what you just said about Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday wasn't in an aggressive mindset in this game. He just wasn't. You didn't really notice him that much offensively at all. And for them to be the best version of themselves, he can't get lost in who he is, right? Because of the other options that they have, the other talent that they have. We know Tatum and Brown are going to be the high volume guys. I think they took 43 shots in this game, 15 for 43. Wasn't their best shooting night. I'll credit Denver's defense a lot for that. The physicality of the game mattered. And then they missed some ones that they normally make. And we know that that's going to be pretty much a typical night for them in terms of volume. But then those other 3 guys, White and Porzingis and Holiday, those 3 guys, it's probably not going to be all 3 of them on a given night. Like every night, one of them is probably going to maybe get less usage because of the way they're being defended. I felt like in this game, it was Drew Holiday, and I felt like there was an acceptance on the part of Drew Holiday that it just kind of wasn't his night, and he wasn't going to be very active or have a big role in what they're doing offensively. And when you get matchups you can take advantage of, Drew Holiday has to stay in the mindset whenever that opportunity presents itself. Okay, then give me the ball, give it back to me, and now I can go. And I don't think he really did that in this game, JJ. It was about as quiet a game as you will get out of Drew Holiday when you watch him offensively. And I think that contributed to some of Denver's success and what they were doing defensively. Is why he just wasn't in that mode to attack when he got opportunities.
One of the first times that they had that matchup, I don't know if you remember the play in the first half. It was on the left wing on the Boston bench side, and Drew had Jokic on a matchup. And it was interesting. He tried a few moves. Jokic slid his feet, did an outstanding job. They got nothing out of it. And then I just don't even remember them even like really trying to exploit that anymore. Even with Drew as a screener, they used it a couple times in the second half. But it's one of those things that I know Mazzulla watching the film is like, all right, how do we take advantage of this next time, right? Or if we get to the finals and they're going to go to that matchup, like what are the ways we can sort of exploit that? Fascinating stuff. Spent a lot of time on that. I want to run through 2 more things real quick. So the Cleveland Cavaliers, the hottest team in the NBA right now, best record over the last 15, 12-3. They've done it all without Evan Mobley, all without Darius Garland. Donovan Mitchell has actually missed 4 games in this stretch. They were 3-1 without Donovan Mitchell in this stretch. They beat Utah, who's playing as well as anyone in basketball right now. They beat the Bulls. They beat Dallas. Kyrie didn't play in that game, but Luka did. In this stretch, the number 6 offense, number 2 defense. This was the version of the Cleveland Cavaliers that I think we all thought we would see to start the season when they were at full strength. And they lose 2 of their best players to injury, and then they go on this run. What are you seeing from the Cleveland Cavaliers? That's my first question. And secondly, because I think there was a lot of people when these injuries happened, they're sitting there at 13-12 where they're like, oh, they should trade Donovan Mitchell now. Are the Cavs still in the conversation potentially as a legit contender once they're at full strength?
All right, so a couple things. And I don't want to, poo-poo on the love we're going to give the Cleveland Cavaliers, but schedule and context do matter. They do matter. Now, they're playing great, and they're playing great on both ends, and they're shooting absolutely. They're out of their mind right now from the three-point line, in large part because of what they're getting from Sam Merrill, George Niang, Karis LeVert. What they're getting off their bench has from an offensive supplement has been absolutely unbelievable. Jared Allen, the way he has played during this stretch, JJ, I don't know how you really keep the guy off the All-Star team when he's this impactful as a rebounder, a rim protector, but also as a scorer. He's having some big scoring nights as well. Donovan Mitchell, on the nights they needed him to, when they have struggled a little bit with some of these other guys, he has just taken over the game. So they've done it in so many different ways, but you do have to take the schedule and who they're playing into context a little bit. During this stretch, and they were basically 500 team before they went on this run. During this stretch, they've got 2 wins against teams that are currently top 6 in either conference. They beat Dallas and they beat the Bucks without Giannis. So there's even an asterisk there. I beat them by 40. I'm not going to take away for how clean they're playing and the production they're getting up and down their roster and how well each of those guys individually is playing and how great their bench has been. I mean, they had 75 points off the bench in one of their wins. So they're getting it in every way that you need to. And now when they get a little bit more tested with who they're playing and some of these top teams, I think it'll give both of us greater perspective on what does this really mean. I think one thing we've seen is you can't forget about them. And I think we had for the most part up to this point, to this stretch over the last month. Prior to that, we had forgotten about the Cleveland Cavaliers. I had barely talked about them. I was kind of watching them. They were dealing with so many injuries. I was like, well, it's really hard to really judge them when you don't have Darius Garland playing, you don't have Mobley playing. It's very difficult to do that. Well, now they've gotten our attention. So now we are paying attention to them on a nightly basis. And they're doing all the things I just mentioned well. So give them credit because they've turned their entire season around over the last month, despite the fact they're still shorthanded. One of the things that is different, they're smaller. They're playing smaller lineups with Jared Allen. I mean, that's what it looks like. They're spacing the floor all over the place.
This was the thing that I was going to bring up.
Okay.
This was the thing. No, I'd keep going because I'm glad you brought this up. I think this is as important as the schedule is how they're playing.
Yeah.
So go ahead. I want you to finish.
It's stylistically the way that they look, and this is going back now, a couple of years, the way that they look and the size they present, that doesn't look like the rest of the league. And it certainly doesn't look like what the rest of the league is doing to them on the other end of the floor and spacing out. And look, Evan Mobley is a long guy that's very versatile. And, he could do a lot of things defensively. He's very active, but you still have big bodies that you're trying to move around defensively to help and rotate and chase the ball and get out to the 3-point line. And it is difficult. And maybe in playoff basketball, with some of the things we've already talked about in this Boston-Denver game, when that starts to be implemented and it slows down and the game is more, lane-centric, ISO-centric, maybe some of those bigger lineups are going to really be advantageous. But I think the smaller lineups and the spacing they've had offensively with the number of shooters they have on the court, the way that they've been able to move defensively and sort of flying around the court with one big on the floor most of the time, it does look like it's given them a little bit more of a modern look to this is what it takes in the league now, because their defensive numbers have been tremendous during this stretch, absolutely tremendous. And their shooting has gone off the charts with what they're getting there. So it's interesting. I'm not one of these guys who are going to say, oh, they're better without Evan Mobley. It's stupid. People will jump on that in a short sample size. It's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it does give them something to think about in terms of their minutes and how they stagger them and what they're going to do going forward when he comes back. And these lineups they've had success with that look smaller. I think it's helped them spacing offensively. I think it's helped them with their defensive rotations and coverages.
I said this earlier this season, and I still believe this. And I think this is a great stretch that exemplifies the point. And the point was they're going to be a good regular season team. I expected that this year. For them, to me, to reach a higher ceiling in the playoffs, Evan Mobley has to shoot threes. He has to be a threat from the 3-point line, especially in the playoffs. And this stretch is a great example of this. Over the last 15, they are number 2 to the Celtics. They've made 15.7 three-pointers a game. They're number 1 in the NBA in three-point attempts over this 15-game stretch. Like, they're playing a completely different way. Now, what has this done? It's given Jared Allen more space. Yes. He's actually, and you're like, well, the Denver Nuggets won last year and Aaron Gordon's not a shooter. Yeah, I get that. But like, Jared Allen's not Jokic offensively, right? He's not making these behind the head tight passes to Aaron Gordon at the dunker spot. Like, it's a different thing. The Denver Nuggets have figured out a way to maximize spacing around Jokic, despite the fact that Aaron Gordon can't shoot threes and is become less and less willing to shoot threes at times. It's a different player. They're different teams. This version of the Cavs, where they're playing fast, they're shooting threes, you're 100% right. It's more modern. So I think, and again, like Milwaukee's another example. Well, Brook Lopez shoots threes. They play two bigs, but Brook Lopez shoots threes, and nobody on the Cleveland Cavaliers roster is Giannis, and no one's Jokic. You're talking about two of the best players in the world, period. Two of the best players in the world, arguably the two best players in the world. I'm not making that argument right now. I'm not making that argument. I'm just saying people would argue they're the two best players in the world. Sure. I'm not making any argument. I want to be clear on that. So this version and how they're playing, I think, lends itself to more success, particularly in the regular season. And if they get Evan Mobley back, and maybe it's not this year, but in the future, he's now a three-point threat around Jared Allen. Like, that's a game changer for me. The guy I want to shout out. A lot of casual fans probably don't even pay attention to this guy. Brought up the bench. Dean Wade. In this stretch, 44% from three. I saw this stat a couple days ago. We have all these metrics, these catch-all, singular stat metrics. Darko was one. Player efficiency rating, of course. We go box plus minus. One is actually called LeBron. There was also a Carmelo. Carmelo was one. One is actually called LeBron. It stands for something. It's an acronym. The defensive LeBron is another part of that catch-all like subset, right? Dean Wade grades out as the number 1 on-ball defender in the NBA this season. So you have a guy who's defending his ass off, shooting 44% from three around Donovan Mitchell, Karis LeVert, Jared Allen. I love it. By the way, Max Strus, I think he's played well, very well for largely most of the season.
Yeah.
He still hasn't had that 8, 10, 12 game stretch that we've seen him have in Miami, where he shoots 8 threes a game, 39%, 41%, whatever it is. So I think there's, it's particularly with Strus, like there is even more I think that they can do. The second part of my question, you kind of answered. Again, I want to see when these guys get back, like their rotations, how they stagger lineups. It will be fascinating to see how the Cleveland Cavaliers finish this regular season.
Very, very. He's got a lot of tough decisions to make when that happens. Because look at the way they're playing now, and you're going to get back a guy, and Darius Garland has been an all-star. You're going to get back Evan Mobley, and I agree with Evan Mobley. I was hoping he would have taken more of a leap to this point as a three-point shooter because I think he's got the stroke to do it. But getting comfortable from out there is a totally different thing, and he just hasn't really done that yet. You're now going to add two guys like that back into the mix with all of this success that other guys have had getting extended playing time. It's going to be very interesting because there's a lot of depth there. And how do you push the right buttons on the right nights and still maintain rhythm for those guys? Because there's so many different guys now that are knocking down threes for this team and are in great rhythm and comfort. And it's going to be a little bit different. Darius Garland has the basketball when Evan Mobley's out there, getting the basketball in that 18-foot area of the floor and not spaced out to the three-point line. When you've had this kind of success with Niang and Merrill and LeVert and Wade and all these guys that have been shooting threes for you, now you add two guys that are high minutes guys back into the rotation. When you've had that much success, it is going to be, you said fascinating. I think that's the perfect word for it because now we have to really watch what happens with their rotation when they get fully healthy. Second half of the year, I also want to see when they play an extended stretch against your top tier teams that are healthy. And they've got some of those coming up. They've got back-to-backs with the Bucks coming up. They've got the Clippers coming up. Then they get, again, some more bottom feeders. Detroit, Memphis, the Spurs, struggling Kings team, the Wizards, the Nets, the Raptors. I mean, that's a long stretch. And so they don't really, and even after that, Philly, Chicago, Orlando, like, they don't have murderer's row in terms of schedule. So maybe these games coming up 3 in a row, but 2 against the Bucks, 1 against the Clippers. If they're at full strength, it gives you a better idea for what this actually really is going to look like when you play the top tier teams that are fully healthy.
All right, last thing real quick. We were texting last night, and just we've talked about it. I think we did a thing last week about which Western Conference, or 2 weeks ago rather, which Western Conference team can move into sort of the tier 1 that are on the outside looking in right now. And I think that tier 1 is Minnesota, Oklahoma City, Denver, Clippers, right? And they're the 4 best teams to me in the Western Conference. The standings say so. Like, I think all 4 of these teams can have a lot of playoff success. Obviously, the Denver Nuggets have shown that. So we were saying, if you could put up a dream scenario, matchup in the Western Conference right now, like for the playoffs, what series would you most want to see? And this could be a first round series. It could be a second round series. It could be conference finals. I don't care. But which 2 teams do you want to see in the playoffs against each other?
I'll do it this way because and I'll do it quickly. This is how I kind of envisioned how I would like to see the first round go. And the reason I want some of these matchups in the first round rather than say, oh, well, this would be awesome if I could see them in the semifinals or the conference finals, because you don't know if you're going to get there. That's how much balance there is in the West. I don't know how the first round is going to play out. So to guarantee some of these matchups, I need to see them in the first round. So I went this way. I'd like to see T-Wolves, Lakers. I want to see those front lines go against each other. I want to see a young guy in Anthony Edwards who we're wondering where the void's going to be filled when LeBron and Curry aren't there anymore. We've talked about Anthony Edwards, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, guys like that being the ones that take the torch. So give me Anthony Edwards and LeBron. Give me Anthony Davis against that front line. So mini LA. I want to see OKC and New Orleans. I love like that core unit at the top of the roster. Those top 3 guys offensively. Let me see, 6-7 games of that. I want to see Denver, Dallas, because I want to see Jokic and I want to see Luka, right? 2 guys that control the game offensively to a higher extent than any 2 players in the NBA and do it stylistically completely differently. I want to see that in the first round. And then finally, that leaves me with Clippers, Suns. Yeah, you give me 7 of that. Durant going back up against Harden again, the firepower of the Suns, the 2-way play of the Clippers, how well they're playing right now. That would be the 4 matchups, JJ, that I would love to see in a dream scenario in the Western Conference.
I like all of that. I looked at it a different way because I could talk myself into a first, like anybody versus Minnesota, anybody versus OKC, anybody versus Clippers, anybody versus Denver. I would love to see the Clippers against the Nuggets in a playoff series. I would love to see that. But in terms of first round where we get a guaranteed matchup, I love that Denver-Dallas call. I really do. How Dallas would guard Jokic with Derek Lively, rookie center. Do they take him off the ball and put Grant Williams on Jokic? How do they stagger with Dwight Powell lineups? Does Maxi Kleber, does he guard Jokic? And then the conundrum of Luka and the defensive coverages there, where Jokic doesn't like to play drop. He likes to be up. So Luka creating 4-on-3s on the backside. I think that series would be really fascinating if we got that in the first round.
Oh, definitely. And I think, those 2 guys, first of all, they've got a relationship, great respect for each other, but they love to compete against each other. And to watch those 2 guys that can beat you as a scorer and facilitator at a higher level than really anybody else in the league, the combination of both of those things in one body, it's those 2 guys are at the top of the list in the ways that they can beat you. So that would be one for me that I hope at some point we get. Look, what's interesting about this, I listed 8 teams, and that means, you're leaving some out. So I don't even have Sacramento listed in there. I certainly don't have a team like Utah that's red hot, but they don't belong in this list.
Kings
And I don't
fans
have
are
the
going to
Golden
hate
State
you
Warriors.
after this one. I got to say, I Kings are fun to watch. Sabonis is having a fucking monster season. Fox had an insane stretch. He's cooled off a little bit, but these 4 matchups: Denver, Dallas, OKC, NOLA, Clippers, Suns, T-Wolves, Lakers. I don't want to leave the Kings out. I love the Kings. I'll take any of those matchups. They're great.
That's what I hit you up about yesterday when I texted you. I said, it's insane. So I have 8 teams here. Write their name on a piece of paper, throw them into a hat, pull out 2 different names, and let's redo this.
Clippers, Lakers in the first round. Clippers, Lakers in the first round. That'd be great.
Any combination of these series, no matter what you get, it's going to be incredible. I just really believe, and I don't think I've ever said it or felt it. Maybe I've said it before. I've never felt it as deeply as I do this year. I really genuinely believe, and hopefully all these teams go into the playoffs healthy, especially with their top guys. I think this could be the single most compelling Western Conference playoffs we have had, start to finish. I think that all of these series, think about what I just laid out for first round matchups. So you're talking about potentially a 1-8, maybe with Minnesota and the Lakers as a 1-8. Now, normally a 1-8, you're like, okay, let's just get through this, right? And let's hope this doesn't drag out because you know who's going to win ultimately. I don't necessarily know that. If the Lakers get into the 8 spot and Anthony Davis, LeBron are healthy, and you got Minnesota that hasn't had a ton of playoff success collectively, having to play that team in the first round, you don't know what's going to happen. OKC, very little, playoff success collectively together with that group, as young as they are. You got to play a veteran group like New Orleans that's got CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram with as much playoff experience as they have. Like that's a different feel for them. Denver, Dallas, 2 of the top stars in the league, single-handedly controlling the game. And then Clippers, Suns, with what that can represent. I mean, so there's no telling how any of this is going to go. And I certainly feel a lot differently about the East. I feel very confident, I think, in 3 of those teams advancing to the second round. I don't know how I feel about any of these teams making it to the second round in the Western Conference, besides probably Denver.
I said at the beginning of last year's playoffs, you could talk me into 7 teams being legit contenders to win the West. And you saw Golden State with the 6th seed win their first round series. Lakers with the 7th seed make the conference finals. Minnesota, I know they lost 4-1, but all the Denver guys were like, oh, that was the toughest series we had. And they did it without Naz Reid and Jaden McDaniels. So I think there's parity. And I think it's good. I think we go into these playoff series now, and it's like, what's going to happen? You saw that in the East last year, right? With Miami getting all the way to the NBA Finals. This is great. This is great. I love the fact that it's not like, we just write it down. This team's advancing.
Yeah,
there's so many legitimately good teams. Now, we have to parse through this throughout the season, how many legitimately great teams there are,
right.
Is why we do this every Monday. But there are legitimately so many good basketball teams right now. And then there's some really shitty ones. There are some really shitty ones too.
Look, and I said about the West, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, I said there was 12 interesting teams. At this extent, that was leaving out Portland, Utah, and San Antonio, basically. Well, you can't say that about Utah anymore, right? You can't. They're fun. They're fun as hell to watch.
They're awesome to watch.
And they're winning, and they're this meteoric rise. They're now a 500 team, and look where they were a month ago. I probably still feel that way about Portland. It's probably the one team I'm not circling them on League Pass to watch the Blazers play. And even San Antonio, look, I guess it's still worth it to watch them, just to watch Victor Wembanyama's progression. But I don't necessarily like watching teams that aren't in a competitive environment. I don't really feel that they are. You can't ever say that historically about the West. I don't care how good the West has been. There hasn't been this many teams that genuinely I sit down and I'm going to be entertained by what I'm about to watch and fascinated by how it's going to play out. So look, we're halfway through. We're halfway through, and who knows what could potentially happen as we get near the trading deadline too. You don't know. There's going to be some moves made then that are going to shuffle things around a little bit as well. But this is great. It's great for us. It's great for basketball fans because right now you can mix and match any pairing you want in the Western Conference, and there's no guarantee how that's going to turn out.
Yeah, all fair. Tim, always fun to do this on a Monday. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Catch up soon.